Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Michael Grime, and I'm a Senior Project Manager for Truman Change, and I will be the host of today's Change Chat. So I just want to officially welcome you to the May 2025. I usually say that, but we've had about 3 this month. The way that these work, if you haven't been before, is that we pick a particular topic, and then we'll provide you with tips and expertise on that topic. We want and we like these sessions to be really informal, and we try to make them as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions throughout, please feel free to unmute yourself, put your hand up, or put a question in the chat, which I will be monitoring throughout today's session. For those of you that have been before, today is a little bit different. Usually we just have a bit of a chat, question and answer, but Lucy will be delivering a presentation today. But don't let that stop you, please. If you have any questions throughout, please feel free to put your hand up or put a question in the chat, which I will be monitoring, as I say. As you may have noticed, we do record these sessions, and everybody who's booked on will receive a copy of the recording. So if you do have to leave for any reason, or you want to share this with somebody else at a later date, you can do so. And in addition, the recordings also go on our YouTube page and on our social media pages. Just so you're aware, the recording will only pick up those that are speaking. It's just how we've set it up. So if you don't want to be recorded and you do have a question, as I say, please pop it in the chat. So today's session is on organisational psychology in public services. And I will just start by handing over to Lucy. Thanks, Lucy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction about me because I think we've got a real mixed bag this time, where we've got some familiar names, but also some people who may not have been on one of our change chats before. So my name's Lucy Truman. I'm an organisational psychologist and the founder of Truman Change, and I specialise in change and transformation in predominantly local government, but also wider public services too. And my geeky area of interest is, are we doing change management wrong? So historically, it's been a very much a project and program management function. And I do think we still do need quite a bit of that. However, I don't think we do enough of the psychology stuff of really understanding culture and people and behaviour. So today's session is really exploring a little bit around the traditional change management set of tools, but then I'm going to share with you my 5 favourite organisational psychology tools and why I think they're relevant and useful models when you are going through change and transformation. So it's going to be a bit of a geeky session, and normally, as Michael said, we do these sessions as almost more of a panel discussion and a bit more kind of fluid, but I wanted to share with you some concrete research and models this time. Do give us feedback and let us know what you think and whether this is useful or whether you do prefer more of an informal panel discussion. But although I have slides, all questions, comments and reflections are absolutely welcome. As Michael said, if you don't want to be recorded, then feel free to put a question in the chat and we'll just ask it on your behalf. And yeah, it's really just a chance to have an hour thinking about geeky psychology stuff. So I hope it is very helpful. Can everybody see my screen? Because I am not confident in Zoom. I'm very used to Teams. So nobody say no, so we will go ahead with it. Okay. So as I said, I'm going to start by just sharing some popular change management models. So these may be things that you've come across before. So this one is the change curve, which is wheeled out and has been wheeled out for a number of years. It's very popular when it comes to change management. And the concept is that we all go through a series of emotions when we are going through change. And the research behind this was actually not done on change management or even a work context. It's based on research that was done on people's emotions and behaviours when they were told that they were terminally ill. So you may also recognise it as the grief curve. It is the same curve. So I think there's a question there as to whether those two circumstances is fair to compare. But what is useful is understanding that there is a kind of an emotional response to when we feel things are changing around us. But I want to just share a couple of alternative models with you for this one. This is how I think the change curve works. It is not all done in the right order by any stretch of the imagination. And if I could just have, I think Zoom does have an option for just raising your hand or just put it in the chat. I'd be interested to know how many people on the call are impacted by local government reorganisation at the moment, because I know we have quite a lot of council people with us. So if you do want to just, so yeah, we've got a thumbs up. If there's any others, do let us know. I made this as a result of our recent change chat on local government reorganisation, but you can apply the concept to any change, which is that although you may be at a certain point on your change curve, even if we accept that it's in the right order, other people will be at different points on it. So in the case of local government reorganisation, at the moment, the CEOs are very much in that place of sort of, having to figure all of this out, but it's not really filtered down to staff yet. So there's going to be this staggered effect. So change curve, very popular, questionable where the research came from, whether it's relevant, but it is a useful tool in terms of thinking about people will have emotional reactions to change. So this is another really popular tool that you may have heard of. This is not from a psychology background. This is very much from a consultancy background. Kotter's 8-step model. And you can see from this diagram that this works on the premise that change, again, goes through a predicted order. So there is a series of steps that you take in order to make change happen. You increase the urgency, you build a team of people around it, develop the vision, communicate for buy-in, and then you're getting into that action place, you're looking for quick wins. There's a sense of resilience and not giving up and then making it stick. So none of that is bad advice. But I think, again, it's worth us questioning, does it always happen in this very predictable order? Can you actually just put these sequences in place? So don't disagree with any of it on principle, but bear in mind this concept of we've kind of developed an approach to change management that is based on this. Everything's predictable. If we do everything in the right order, then change will magically occur. This one is probably my favourite traditional change management kind of tool. It's called the transitions model, and this is less steps, but 3 sort of components. And they are, we need to be clear on what we're letting go of and what's ending. We then get into a neutral zone where people get this sense of living out of a suitcase. And then we move into a new beginnings, and that people's needs and behaviour will be different at those 3 points in time. Now, my criticism of this is, in reality, particularly in local government where most of my work is, we never really get to that end place. So we're often dancing between them because we're always needing to change something. So I don't think it's quite as clear cut as it is on here, but it is a really useful tool for understanding why people feel a sense of insecurity when they're in that neutral zone, when the time is really about experimentation, trying new things. That's a very different energy than at the start of the journey where people are feeling that, well, if you don't want me to do this anymore, I'm going to have to stop using this IT system anymore. So it's in a slightly different kind of energy in those different places. So yeah, that is my favorite one. I'm not going to go through any more change management stuff because we've done all the change chats about change management as a function. But if you do want to ask any questions about traditional change management methodologies, then do put them in the chat. There's no issue at all. So my challenge is, well, what does research tell us? Because what we do know is that the majority of change management tools out there are either borrowed from other types of research, like the change curve, or they have actually been developed by consultants rather than academics. Now, I'm a consultant. What consultants want is to come up with a nice model that's easy to scale up and sell. That's how they make their money. So is there a risk that we've created a bit of a set of tools based on their ability to oversimplify something so that it's sellable and scalable? And my argument to that is possibly yes. But I'm not the first person to have looked at this. So there was some research done by a group of people, which is Stoughton et al., and it was only in 2018, so it's still reasonably recent, although it was pre-COVID, and I do think we learned a lot of different things during COVID about how to do change. But what they did was they mapped out a lot of these sequential change management tools and looked at what they had in common. So they mapped 10 different ones. So some of the ones I've shared, some of the ones that you may have heard of, like ADKAR, there's one by Beer, there's a Lewin's 3 stages. So there's lots of different ones of these where they are this concept of you follow this journey in this order. And what they found was that they were all working. So they did have some things in common, and there were some elements that were backed by science. You know, we know from experiments and field studies that when we engage with staff and communicate with staff, they're more likely to embrace change. So they're not all rubbish by any stretch, but they did all work on this assumption that change is rational and it's a journey that can be planned in a certain order. And I personally think that is a big assumption to make. They also work on the assumption that change is something that people will resist. So a big part of the function of change management and the training of change management is how to reduce resistance. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't resistance to change. You know, I've been working in change for over 20 years. There's lots of resistance to it. But to build an entire model based on the assumption that people will resist and that it's our job to stop them from resisting, I think again is quite a strong position to take, because people tend to resist change because they don't understand it or they don't think it's a good idea. We don't just naturally resist change for no reason. And I think there's an interesting question there as to, well, what other philosophies are they? If we've built an entire profession around these assumptions and this philosophy that change is predictable, that change is going to happen in order, and everybody's going to resist it, and it's our job to stop that resistance. What if we removed those assumptions and started looking at change from a different perspective? So I'm going to just pause there before I go into the psychology stuff. And there are lots of different perspectives of change. Psychology is only one of them. But please do put in the chat what your reflections are. So when you've been through change in an organisation, has it felt like it's been dominated by this? We have a plan. It's all going to happen into this order and everybody's got to fall into line. Or did that not work? I'm interested to know what your experiences of change are. So please do put in the chat. If you don't want to be named, then you can feel free to send the message to Michael or myself privately. Because I think we've certainly in the sectors which I support, we've really focused heavily on this concept of project management. We've got a plan. It's all going to happen in this order. So yeah, please do share your reflections. So what if we look at psychology? So what if we look at a completely different profession with different set of assumptions and look at what that can tell us about how people manage to do change when they are in the workplace. So I'm going to share with you 5 models. I will say the world of organisational psychology, which is in effect psychology in the workplace, there are hundreds and hundreds of models. So this really is a whistle-stop tour, and they are just my personal favourites. So again, share your reflections, share your questions, because you might have a question and I might be able to share about a different model. So first of all, this is a really quite old one that you've probably heard of. It is Maslow's hierarchy of needs is fundamentally about motivation. So this concept is that we have a hierarchy of needs in order to be our best self in work. And at the bottom of those is physiological. So can we actually afford to pay the bills? Can we afford a house? Can we afford food? Are our physical safety needs met? Then we've got a sense of safety, which can be physical or it can be psychological. Do I feel like I am safe to be able to do good work? If you don't feel safe, you're not going to get to a place of self-actualization. There's then a need for love and belonging. So in a work context, that would certainly be that, you have good relationships with people that you work with. You feel like you belong there. The culture feels good. Only when you've got the level below can you move up. So then you get to a place where you start to feel like, actually, yeah, my self-esteem is good. I can do a good job. All my needs are met. I like the people I work with. I've got the resources that I need. And then the top level of that is self-actualization, which is, are you able to grow into your best self? So this concept is, as I say, it's quite old. It's delivered in a lot of management training and possibly oversimplified a little bit. But I think it's a useful one to bear in mind when you're going through some sort of change program, because if I use, say, for example, a fundamental big restructure as an example, then we are really almost attacking that sense of physiological, am I going to have a job? So if you're going through that process and your people are behaving perhaps a little bit erratically, and you're trying to get them to a space of self-actualization where we're planning the future and being our best selves, but they don't feel safe because they're going through a restructure, this helps to explain some of that behavior. So for each of these psychology models, what I've done is put a little comment in the top to say when this model helps. And I think this model helps when you're going through change and people are reacting emotionally. I think it tells you a little bit more than perhaps the change curve does. The change curve feels a little bit passive. It feels a little bit like everybody's just going to go through this and we just have to suffer through it. This enables you to target where those needs are. Any pause for questions? I can see there's questions
Yeah.
coming in, but I can't read and present at the same
Yeah.
time.
Sorry, I was just waiting for time to come in. So we've had a couple of questions. Do you think it is the case that assuming resistance gives change leaders a pass to not deal with people?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think it does two things. I think it enables people to just push through and say, well, people are just resisting. It stops us from engaging properly because sometimes people resist because it's a bad idea. Sometimes they resist for other reasons, like the needs aren't being met. And a couple of the other slides will explain other reasons why people might resist. But if I'm being honest, I don't like to use too negative language, but it's a little bit lazy to just accept resistance and plow through. It's an important thing to understand that resistance. There has been times when I've been running change programs and they were right to resist it. What we were trying to do was not a good idea. So I think it's partly that. And I also think it's partly because it enables people to feel a sense of control. If they just assume that staff will resist, then they don't have to engage with it. And, we've got a plan and we're going forward anyway.
Great. And we've got another comment and question from Sarah. So, seeing wide acknowledgement that change transformation is a constant state and no clear start and end.
Yeah.
That was probably always the case, but the wicked environment highlights weaknesses in the tools. How
Yeah.
does this change how we talk and communicate about change? And what have you seen that can address this?
So that is absolutely bang on. And this is one of the reasons why I worry that we've we've driven project and program management as a methodology for doing change. So it helps to have some structure and plan and discipline. That's not what my issue is with project and program management. But if you go, like we've just talked about the core assumptions of change management, the core assumptions of project management is that there is a start and an end to it. And that is absolutely not the case. So if you look now at the last 5 years alone, we've had COVID, we've had wars with Ukraine, which has impacted local authorities in terms of dealing with people and refugees coming in. We have got local government reorganisation that's impacting a lot of groups. We've got constant changes in demand in society. And I fear that we've positioned change leadership as a skill that is separate from business as usual when the two are fundamentally intertwined. So, in addition, to make that problem even worse, the vast majority of leadership and management programs that happen in public sector organizations are founded on stability. So how do you manage resources? How do you manage budgets? How do you get consistent results? We're not teaching people how to lead change, and we're not teaching people how to deal with complexity. So I've not seen anybody nail it yet, but I think you're absolutely right to call it out. And we have to call it out because of those assumptions of that change has an end. It never ever does. And that we need to be leading from a place of stability because we can't. So I think it's still very much a work in progress. I do think that a lot of the psychology tools that I'm giving you now are not change dependent. They are actually just tools to understand how people behave in the workplace. So you could review them at different times and see where people sit. They're not about a project with an end date. They're about let's understand what's going on for our people right now at this snapshot point in time, which I think is helpful.
That's everything for now. Thanks.
Please do keep putting questions in, though. I don't mind being interrupted at all. So this is a tool which we've actually run full change chats on this tool. This is a simplified tool. The actual godfather of culture is Edgar Schein. So if you really want to get geeky about culture, Edgar Schein's work is the place to start. This is a simplified version that we use just because we often don't have the time to go to the depth because of resources and people need to get answers quite quickly. This works on the assumption that culture is how messages move around the organization. So culture is not some magic fairy dust that's in the air. It's not something that's out of control. It is something that is fundamentally about messaging. And what this tool enables you to do is reflect. It's difficult to do yourself, but possible. It's easier to do as an outsider. Reflect on how do behaviors send messages to people, how do symbols send messages to people, and how do systems send messages. So some examples of that could be if you are an organization where you want your people to be stepping up, being empowered, making decisions quicker, but your leaders are not sending that message through their behavior. Your systems are really clunky and don't allow people to work quickly. Your processes around making decisions are really lengthy and dragged out. Then can you see how that you're sending contradictory messages? Now, the reason why this is one of my favorite tools when going through change is because what we historically have done is we've set up a change program, we've set up a project team, we've done a plan and expected it to land. But actually, if you're going through a change at the moment, and I'm just going to pick because I can see one of our clients is on the call. We've worked with a client who's brought a housing Almo back in house. By looking at the culture through these lenses of, okay, so we're changing the ownership and the leadership of that organization. How are we displaying that in our behaviors? How are we displaying that in systems and processes? And how are we displaying that in symbols? And symbols might be silly little things like lanyards or badge passes, who can get into what buildings. And you can see how when you start to look at culture from that perspective and look at change from that perspective, how are we being consistent in this message about the change and the culture that we want to be as an organization? You then get to a way deeper place than you do with just having a project plan and a project team delivering a change that's doing something to people. So this is a tool that I use constantly. It works really well when change just isn't landing, because it usually just isn't landing because you're communicating mixed messages, not on purpose. Nobody does it on purpose. But particularly in complex organizations like the public sector, it's really difficult to keep a handle on messaging, and to look at messaging through this lens enables you to think a bit more creatively than just what does the comms briefing say. It's about consistency. So if you're going through a change at the moment and you want to really take a people-centered approach to it, this is a brilliant place to start. So think about what your change is, think about how you want that to land, and then critically look at and get an outsider to help you with it if you need to, because some of these things it's difficult for us to see ourselves. Really critically look at where are you saying something entirely different, and I promise you, you'll find all sorts. Everybody does. Okay. So this is another favorite tool of mine. This is the self-determination theory by Deci and Ryan. This is actually a motivation theory. So this is how do we be our best selves and be motivated in work? And Deci and Ryan believe that we need 3 things in place in order to feel like we're good at our job and that we're able to deliver well. So they are autonomy. We do well when we have a sense of control or autonomy about how we work. We don't generally like being told what to do all the time. So people need a sense of autonomy to get a sense of self-esteem and get, empowered. We also need competence. So the vast majority of people want to go to work and do a good job. Most of us want to do a good job. We don't like feeling like we're not doing a good job. So we have this innate drive to be competent, and in some versions of this model, that's even called mastery. And the third thing is we want to have good relationships with the people that we work with. We are by our evolutionary nature social beings, so we want to be able to get along with the people that we work with. Now, why is this relevant to change? Because this is nothing to do with change, this model. It's just a basic motivation model. But where I think this really, really plays into change is if you are working with people on changing their behavior, changing the way they work, changing systems and processes, if you have these three things in mind, you'll do that change differently. So one of the things we do a lot of is something that we call workforce-driven approach to change, where we do workshops, we get people together, we let the staff drive the change. So we have the leaders say what the change should be, but the staff drive how do we do it. We do that because of this model. So when you get a bunch of people together, say, right, we've got to change this about how we work. Can you tell me how you think it should be changed? You're meeting that need for autonomy. You're meeting that need for competence because people will get used to the change. They'll talk about it. They'll get good at it. And you're meeting that need for relationship because they will work together to solve that problem. So this is I never see this model in any sort of change management conversations, but honestly, it's so core to everything that we do that if you're trying to take people on a journey, make sure you're giving them some autonomy, make sure you're building the relationships, and make sure you're giving them the opportunity to get good at what they need to get good at, and they will fly. So this is really helpful when you are designing change and you're really having to think through what the impact is on people. And it genuinely is a model that I come back to all the time, even if I don't talk about it, even if it's just in my mind when I'm running stuff. Cats and cheese is another model which I talk a lot about, and some of you, if you follow me on LinkedIn, will have seen that I do quite a few videos on this. So the formal name for this model is Gray's reinforcement sensitivity theory. And this is a model about our responsiveness to risk and reward. And it's called cats and cheese because people, so the original experiments were done on rats and mice. And what they did was they exposed them to the smell of cats, which to them was a threat, and to the smell of cheese, which is obviously a reward. And then they monitored their behavior. And what they found was that there were individual differences in that some mice are really super motivated by the smell of cats, and some are really super motivated by the smell of cheese. And it turns out this translates to humans. So we have individual differences in that some of us are more sensitive to risk and some of us are more sensitive to reward. Some of us are not particularly sensitive to either, and they're your people that are really good at staying the course through the chaos. And then some people, which I score highly on both, means I'm an emotional mess because I'm always chasing some exciting new project, but scared it will go wrong. So you've got these differences between us. And the reason why this is a useful tool is because you see it play out in conflict. So when there is a change coming, so again, this wasn't anything to do with change, it's a motivational theory. But when there is a change, what happens is the stakes increase. So there's always either something to lose or something to gain, or perhaps a bit of both. And you will see people's behaviors become amplified. So you will see your cats people become more anxious about risk and more focused on risk. And you will see your cheese people become more excited and driven to chase the cheese. This can play out at individual levels, but it can also play out in organizations. So you may find that you have teams within your organization that are fundamentally all about reducing risk. For example, procurement teams. To some argument, in some organizations, HR teams can be fundamentally about reducing risk of issues. You've then got teams like maybe children's social care that probably went into that job to chase the cheese. You know, they all went into that job to make children's lives better, but they're working in a phenomenally high risk situation. And then they get Ofsted in, which is a massive cat. All of that behavior amplifies. So where this helps is when you have got change going on and people are being a bit dysfunctional, and you've got some people saying this could all go wrong, it's terrible, and then you've got other people saying for God's sake shut up, it's going to be fine, let's crack on, and they're not able to communicate with each other, because the very principle of this model is that we see the cat or we see the cheese depending on our own preferences. Or as I said, some of us aren't impacted as much, some of us are impacted by both. So if you've got somebody that is focusing 100% on the cats and they're talking to somebody that's focusing 100% on the cheese, they almost can't hear each other. There's no amount of, yeah, but it's all going to be fine, that person's going to hear that's going to make the difference. So this is a really fun tool, especially when you bring in the cats and the cheese element, because it then becomes a fun conversation. It's not a conversation that's saying you are risk averse or you are being too chaotic. It becomes a more gentle and fun conversation. So where this plays out in change is, first of all, you can use it as a tool. So you can use it as okay, if we were going to focus on the cats, what would we say? If we were going to focus on the cheese, what would we say? So you can draw it out by forcing yourself into the different mindsets. But also it's a tool for team dynamics, organizational dynamics, and just understanding why sometimes it feels like you're speaking different languages from somebody. Okay, any questions or any feedback, please do drop them in the chat. I am not a fan of doing these talking at change chats, but we've had really positive feedback from the last couple that we've done. So please do pop in the chat if there's anything that you want to ask. And Michael, do stop me.
Sarah has just said this is fab.
Oh, thank you,
That's
Sarah.
nice.
Thank you. I don't like being too lectury, but every time we do one like this, people are like, do more like that. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't like doing it. I like doing it when we're chatting to people. So this one is one that's really been on my mind recently. We have been doing quite a bit of work in housing, and I have had this. Michael will drop the email in the chat for me, no worries. We've been doing quite a bit of work in housing, but it's not relating to housing, this issue. I think it's way, way wider than housing. So one of the things that I've noticed is that there are some parts of the public sector that are really good at acknowledging and handling different types of demands in jobs. So if you are a children's social worker, you know when you go into that job that you are going to be dealing with the worst of humanity. You're probably going to get some training as part of your education. You will have formal supervision as you go through it. You will have a regulator in the form of Ofsted that takes emotional demands very, very seriously. There are other parts of the public sector where frontline staff are very often dealing with the same families, the same situations. They will be dealing with it from a different angle, but that do not have any of that support. And what I have noticed is that when people talk about overwhelm or they're too busy, they sometimes struggle to articulate what that means. And this is a really good model for understanding that. So it's still fairly new. It's only about fairly new. It's 25 years old, isn't it? But it's, it's not from the 80s, and it's the jobs demands resources model. And it's a really useful way of looking at jobs from a perspective of, it's quite transactional. And when you explain it, it's really obvious, but unless you've thought of it, it's not obvious. So we go to work and we have a set of demands on us, but also we have certain resources available to us. And the key to avoiding burnout is that those two are balanced, and ideally the demands are a little bit lower than the resources. Where this gets interesting is when you start to consider that there's different types of demands. So this is a great tool for when you are working with people that you can sense this overwhelm, but you can't get to the bottom of why. And most people don't have this awareness as to why they may have that overwhelm. So normally when we say we're busy or we're overwhelmed or we're struggling, we mean it from a quantitative perspective. So we mean there's not enough hours in the day. My workload is too high. But actually, within our brains, that's not the only demand. We also have demands around our emotions. So if you are doing something that is particularly challenging emotionally and it's going to upset you and you're going to carry that weight, so that could be something to do with care. It could be something to do with, dealing with a family that's going through really difficult situations, but there is emotional demands. There's also physical demands, which, might be that you're in the sort of job where you're on your feet all day and it's hard, kind of building work or even hairdressers stood on the feet all day. That's a very different type of demand from there's too much work. It doesn't mean that it's any less of a demand though. There's also cognitive demand. So where we see things like decision fatigue, if you are constantly having to make decisions quickly, that has a certain type of demand to it. The social demands where you're having to work with others, that's really showing up in places that are trying to move from being more home working to being back in the office. Some of us are now feeling those social demands much higher. And then finally, there's organisational demands. So whilst your caseload and your work might be, manageable, if you've then got a massive ton of admin to do around that, that creates a different type of demand. Now, people don't tend to have the self-awareness to understand this about themselves, so they will just feel overwhelmed, but actually they feel like it's the workload, but it might not be the workload. It might be that emotional demand. It might be that social stuff. It might be the admin and the organizational stuff. So it's a brilliant, brilliant model for really unpicking what is pushing people over the edge here, because I think for a lot of years we focused on the workload because that's to some degree easy to analyze. It's not easy to fix because of all the cuts we've had, and nobody's quiet, are they? Let's be honest. But it's easy to analyze. It's very easy to look at somebody and say, right, well, you've got this number of widgets that you've got to produce and you've got this number of hours across the week. If you've done that work and people are still feeling overwhelmed, it's probably because of a different type of demand. So what are the resources available to us? So this overlaps slightly with the Deci and Ryan model. That concept of people having autonomy about how they work comes up again and again and again in organizational psychology. We like to have some freedom and autonomy about how we work. Our resources also include our relationships, which again overlaps with the Deci and Ryan self-determination model. If we have good relationships with people we work with, we are better able to deal with different types of demand. This really comes into its own on those emotional demands. If you've had to deal with something difficult, but then you were able to come back to the office and debrief a little bit and chat to your friends about it, then you will go home at the end of that day in a much better place than you would have done otherwise. Learning and development, we need to be able to teach people how to deal with stuff. That's really important. And that's something that I see a massive difference across the sector in terms of coaching and resilience. So some of these things are organizational. We need to make sure that organizationally we do have the right resources available for people, but also there is something about personal skill and resilience that's really important in this. So, as I said, this model is a useful model when it comes to if you're going through a change, and I always come back to change because that's obviously my bag, my cup of tea. But if you are going through a change and you're making changes to people's jobs, or people are expressing a sense of overwhelm, this is a really good tool to understand what is causing that overwhelm. Because, and again, speaking on a personal level, I have no issue at all getting up and talking in front of a room full of people. Big things don't stress me out. What stresses me out when my inbox is chaos, my admin is overrunning, that disproportionately impacts my brain. It creates too much demand on me and I feel like I'm rubbish at my job and I can't get stuff done because my inbox is messy. So we'll all have personal quirks and we'll all have things that pull our levers more than others. I think we need to talk about this a bit more because we all feel overwhelmed and we've all got loads of work, but I don't think that we all have that self-awareness or even organizational awareness of what causes demands and how can we manage them better. Yeah, I can see there's a comment in there saying it helps to rationalize and explain feelings of overwhelm. It's really a good tool to prevent people tipping over into burnout, because often what puts people into burnout is not necessarily workload. And again, the narrative around stress and burnout is really driven by workload when it might not be workload. When there are times when I've known people that have hit burnout, not because of workload, but because of a mismatch of values, where they don't feel that the work they're doing is aligned with their personal values. That is much more likely to cause burnout than them having to work slightly longer hours for a short period of time. So really being able to understand that and use that at the center of your change and the experience of your staff and designing jobs is really, really useful.
A couple of other things. Rachel said, shout out to council customer services on this, underrated in every sense, and especially emotional and cognitive pressures. And then Zenaida said, yes, a very good model and needs to be more widely used in the context of leading transformation.
Yeah, it really does. And Rachel's right. And to be honest, you could pick almost any area in the public sector. They're going to be dealing with difficult stuff. Like all of the public sector is there dealing with difficult stuff. And I find it kind of sad that we've invested so much in, although I don't think in children's social care they use this language, they will use language like supervision. It's a different kind of terminology, but the principles of this are very much there. It's absolutely not there in other areas. I think it's lacking in housing. I think you're absolutely right. It's lacking in customer service because again, they are dealing with stuff that is challenging. And I can imagine in all areas of public sector, it is something that thinking this through, we could do a lot better work if we use it. Okay, so other topics, and I am, I'm conscious this is only a short whistle stop tour. Please do put in the chat if there are other topics that you would like us to cover. We run these change chats fairly regularly, and we're doing a lot at the moment because we're doing almost our usual ones, and then we're doing one specific around local government reorganisation as well. But I do think organisational psychology can give, it's such a rich base of research and evidence around how our brains work in the workplace that I don't feel like we're fully taking advantage of at the moment. So other topics that I think are interesting in organisational psychology are identity, which is a fascinating topic. It's particularly fascinating for people that are going through any form of mergers or any form of changing the identity of the workplace. And so whether that's local government reorganisation, whether it's things like Almos being brought back in-house, how people identify with their work is an interesting topic. And it comes in different levels. So some people identify with their profession. So you'll often find if you ask somebody what they do at a party, then a doctor will say they're a doctor. They won't say, I work at such and such a hospital, unless you ask a follow-up conversation. Some people identify much more with their team than they do their organisation. That's really, really common. So starting to understand what identity means, particularly if you're doing some sort of change or transformation that's messing with that, I think is a really useful area to look at. Motivation, we've touched on quite a bit of motivational theory today, but there is honestly an entire arm of research all about it. Like, are we motivated by intrinsic values, or are we motivated by extrinsic things like money and status? It's actually really difficult to tell the difference between those two things, I think, but there's a lot of research around it. So what does enable us to be motivated and be our best selves in work? There's loads of good stuff around that. Leadership is something that I am suspicious about, if I'm honest. When I did do a short video about the history, and I've probably got a vibe from this call, I quite like looking at the history of how some of these and what the assumptions are behind some of these things. The history of leadership, understanding of what makes good leaders is fascinating. So as you can probably imagine, back in the early days, it was almost a God-given thing. And I mean that quite literally. People thought that some human beings, always men, not women, were blessed with some magical innate ability to lead by God. We then went down is it a personality trait kind of school of thinking, and there was loads of research done around whether or not you can distill it down into traits and characteristics. It's moved on to being more about, so there's lots of stuff around situational leadership and contextual leadership, but there's also lots of types of leaderships that, we've, I think, glamorized around, being about driving purpose and values. But actually, if you're not a good ethical person, you can still use those types of leadership to drive an agenda, tapping in on a sense of purpose, but that sense of purpose is actually quite an evil one. So, look at big key people in history, like, say, for example, Hitler, that, led from a place of a clear drive and sense of purpose, but it was a really horrific one. So I think we glamorize leadership in different ways at different points in history, and I don't think we understand it at all yet. But there's loads of still quite interesting different theories and ways of looking at leadership. But I think the art of it is to take all of it with a pinch of salt, because I don't think we know. I really don't think we know. Well-being, we've touched on a little bit, and stress, we've touched on a little bit with that last model. But there's lots of research out there about what causes stress, what improves well-being, what helps people to feel well in the workplace. That's quite, I don't want to say it's too new, because it is something that has been around for quite a few years, but I think that that's something that the goalposts are moving quite a lot on at the moment. So there's lots of interesting research about that. Training. So there's loads in organisational psychology about transference of learning and how we learn. So there's a really common one that's not actually got any scientific backing, which is, the learning styles, that some of us are visual, some of us are auditory. That's not really got any evidence behind it. But it is interesting as a concept to make sure that you're doing things in different types of ways. But there's loads of stuff out there about that. job satisfaction. So we know that when people have good morale and they've got good job satisfaction, that they do their best work. So there's lots of research around what creates that and how you can consciously build it. And also there's loads of research around team dynamics. So how people work together as teams. Have we got any more questions or comments, Michael?
We've just had a few comments in regard to the other topic. So one from Rachel: I would love to see something on identity in the future, Lucy, especially with LGR on the horizon. Local people work in local services and they're seeing a dual change in their identity, one as a resident and one as a member of staff. And
Yeah.
then Sarah said, would be interested in systems thinking tools, regenerative leadership skills to approach tech AI change.
Yeah, I need to look at the AI bit. I need to log into my journals and have a good look at that because it's very in its infancy. But yeah, I do think that that is massively going to impact how we lead. And one of my concerns about it at the moment, again, coming from a local authority background, is we've not got a level of maturity in it yet. So I worry about councils, and this is probably true of any sector, it's just councils is what I know, kind of getting ripped off by big AI tech companies when they've not developed the maturity yet because they don't have the knowledge yet around, okay, what are the things we really need to think about? You know, what are the ethics we need to think about? What is the data stuff we need to think about? What is the people impact that we need to think about? Oh, thank you. I will read that book because I do feel like this is something I want to get into a bit more detail about. And I also worry that there will be some councils that it's so alien to them, they'll put the head in the sand and not get the benefits from it. And I think it is a fundamentally, although it's a tech-driven agenda, it's a people behaviour change thing that's needed in order to get us in a position to use AI well. Systems thinking, I have reflected on that recently. If I just go back, can I go back? I don't like to use Zoom. If we just go back to this model, systems thinking, I think, plays a part in this, in those emotional demands, because we have a higher expectation now of people that to not say it's not my job and for people to start really reflecting and thinking across a wider system. And that's actually a significant demand. You know, if you're expecting people to think system wide and not in their own box, that's a big cognitive shift. And I think we might have underestimated that. I think that while we've got senior people talking about systems thinking almost from a theoretical basis, it's really struggling to filter down. We still, when we filter down, are in silos of, well, that's the police, that's the care service, that's housing. And I think we've not done that work to really think through what are the demands of lifting some of that up. So yeah, that is a good shout. We should do more on systems thinking. Any more ideas, please do let us know, because we're always doing change chats. So in terms of if you're going through change at the moment, which I imagine most of you are, or you wouldn't be joining us on the call, here are some tips. So again, lifting just out of the detail, because what I don't want you to do is go away and feel a bit overwhelmed, because that's a lot of geeky psychology stuff there. Always start with a very basic question of what will be different and answer that from multiple perspectives. So if you are doing, for example, local government reorganisation, start now to build some clarity on what will be different for residents, for staff, for managers, for members, and anybody else that is a stakeholder in this. I sometimes think if we simplified change management down to this one question, we'd probably be in a better place. Because once you're able to articulate what will be different for a group of people, you're then able to start thinking through, right, what support and help might they need to make that difference and accept that difference and work with that difference. So always start with this. If you're going through a change program, what will be different for, and niche it down to specific groups of people, because then you'll be able to start thinking about, oh, well, actually, it's going to be quite a different culture in that part of the organization, so let's apply culture mapping. Oh, it's going to create different demands on jobs in this or this part of the network or the system, so let's have a look at job demands. Well, that it will enable you to diagnose what type of support people need, because that's another thing that I think change management is missing. I think we just say there is a change, these are the people, give them some training and it'll all be fine. I don't think we do enough to tailor, and the start to tailoring what support is needed is asking the question, what will be different? So my other tips for doing change in the future is, number one, know your culture. If you don't know your culture, and I say this as a professional consultant, I am working in different organizations constantly. The first thing I do is get to know their culture. Because if you are trying to apply something within an organization that will not land within that organization, you are wasting your time, and it will be like pushing water uphill. So the first step is really know the culture and understand what needs to be different about the culture for that change to happen. I think we often start with project and program management, and then we only think about culture afterwards when it's failed. I think it needs to be at the beginning. So the second tip I have is pretty similar to what I said on the last slide. Design and tailor your approach. Like, start to build a toolkit, because there's some change management stuff that's really good. There's some project management stuff that's really good. I love a plan on a page. I love it. Something that's really simple that I can see what's happening when and what the milestones are. So if you start to build a bit of a toolbox that you can design a different way of doing it every time, you will be in much stronger position. I did a big piece of research interviewing council chief execs after the pandemic to understand how they did change during the pandemic compared to before, and how they're going to do it after. And what really came out that was very useful was that it's a concept of reading the room. There are times when change needs to happen fast. There are times when it needs to be slow. There are times when you need a lot of governance. There are times when you don't need as much. There's not a manual for change that works. It is an ability to design and tailor as you go. Read the room, read the culture. What does it need? Number 3, and this is a challenge because budgets are tight, but do resource the change and think about the skill. I know these two I often talk about together because they are kind of two sides of the same coin. It does take work to make change happen. It doesn't happen magically by itself. You do need people around you that are able to have the skill to read the room and figure out what is needed. So I think that you probably do need some support, or you need people that are comfortable with change. You need some of your cheesy people as well as your cats people going through it. But also, I think, generally we have to start making a commitment to the point that we raised earlier. I think it was Sarah who said it, was that change is not a once thing and it's done. If we start to really embrace the fact that because of the speed of technology, because of how the world is changing, in local government, politics change so much. If change is part of business as usual, why are we not training our managers in it? We have to be training our managers in it. We've got to move people away from this mindset of, if we can just get a level of certainty, we'll be all right, because we ain't never going to get it. So we need to be changing the way that we train our managers and our people going forward. So just a little comment on here. This is one of my favorite sayings, which is, to someone with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We will all know somebody that is a walking Prince 2 manual, that's learned one methodology and then they apply it bluntly to everything. I don't think this is the way that we're going to be doing change going forward. And I do think whilst lots of people are worried about things like AI taking jobs, I think that in some ways, the ability that we have as humans to see who is struggling, where they're struggling, that is where this skill is at. That is where leadership will go. It will go to a place of being super clever at reading culture, being super clever at reading rooms, and being able to diagnose and put in interventions as they're needed. And finally, just another quote. Everybody calls evolution survival of the fittest, but it is not. It is the survival of the adaptable. So we have to be good at this. We have to be able to adapt, and we have to be able to do change well. So my plea to everybody is, use all the tools you can. Don't fixate on the traditional project and program management or change management. There are lots of other philosophies out there. There's lots of other ways of thinking about behavior than those tools. And, just have a mixed bag, and then you can pull out what you need when you need it. Any questions?
There's nothing in the chat. Sarah has put a link in to a useful tool they discovered recently for diagnosing culture, etc. A depth finding tool. So a few people have liked that. But apart from that, nothing has come in. So I'll give everyone a minute or so.
Thank you. I think it was very informative, Lucy. So thank you for that. And just thought I'll say that out loud.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'll just want to say thank you again for Lucy for today's session. Also, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. Before everybody does go, I just want some dates for your diary. Next Friday, we have at the same time, we have a communication and engagement session for people who are going through the local government reorganisation. And we have a service reviews and evaluation change chat on the 27th of June. I've just put the link in to them and you can access them via our website. Also, as we did mention, if you do have any other subjects you'd like us to discuss at future change chats, please do put them in the chat as well. And if you have enjoyed today, and if you haven't seen some of our change chats previously, we have lots available on our website. These cover topics such as the LGR, housing, change management, and culture change. So everyone will receive an email now that will have a copy of the recording. And if anybody on the call does want to have a conversation with any of the Truman Change team, please get in touch, and that can be arranged. Looks like we haven't got any more questions, but a lot of people saying thank you and how much they've enjoyed the session. So just want to say thanks again, Lucy, and thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you at a future change chat.
Thank you, and please do give us your feedback about topics and styles of change chats, because we've just about I think we've got 2 more on this program, but we'll soon be designing the next program for the next few weeks. So please do let us know if there's anything particular you want us to delve into. Thank you very much for joining us.